Good luck with your little business, Nate. I'm done wasting my life on a man who can't provide. Those were the last words my wife said to me before handing me divorce papers. She had no idea what was coming. My name is Nate, and this is the story of how my marriage fell apart and how I discovered who my wife really was. When Kathleen and I got married many years ago, I was full of hope and ambition. I had just launched my own consulting firm after working for a big firm in my 20s. I believed my consulting process would revolutionize how small businesses manage their operations. Kathleen seemed supportive at first. She'd smile when I talked about my vision, nod along when I explained my business plans, and tell her friends that she was married to an entrepreneur. Those early days felt promising, even though money was tight. We had a small apartment, we could pay our bills, and we had food on the table. It wasn't luxurious, but it was enough, and I thought we were building something together. My mother died years before I met Kathleen, so my dad was the only family I had left. He was the kind of man you'd walk past on the street without a second glance. For 30 years, he worked as a mid-level manager at a manufacturing company, nothing fancy, just steady work. He lived in the same 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood for decades, and he drove a 15-year-old Honda Accord that he fixed himself whenever something broke. When Kathleen met him during our engagement, she smiled and shook his hand, but I saw it in her eyes. She was disappointed. My dad would cut coupons out of the Sunday newspaper, buy his clothes at Walmart, and when he wanted to treat himself to dinner, he'd go to the same diner he'd been going to for 20 years, where a meal cost $8. Everything about him screamed ordinary, working-class guy living on a tight retirement budget. Kathleen never once asked me what I might inherit from him someday, because, from what she could see, there was nothing to inherit. Honestly, I didn't think about it much either. My dad had always told me the same thing since I was a kid. Make your own way, Nate. Stand on your own 2 feet. I respected that. Even when my business was struggling and I was barely keeping the lights on, I never asked him for a loan or handout. In my mind, he'd already given me everything that mattered. He made sure I got one of the best educations anyone in the United States could have. I graduated without a single dollar of student debt. That was his gift to me, and I wasn't going to ask for more. The first 2 years of our marriage were manageable. My business was slow, but it was growing. I landed a few small clients, local companies that needed help setting up their computer systems and managing their data. It wasn't much, but it paid the bills. Kathleen worked at a dental office, but her salary was lower than what my business brought in. Between the two of us, we covered rent, groceries, utilities, and had a little left over. We weren't living large, but we weren't drowning either. But by year 3, things started to stagnate. I wasn't landing the big contracts I'd hoped for, the corporate clients with deep pockets who could pay 5 or 6 figures for a complete system overhaul. Competition was fierce. There were bigger firms with established reputations, and I was just one guy working out of a small office, trying to prove myself. Every dollar I made, I put back into the business, new software, marketing, certifications to make myself more competitive. That meant our personal finances stayed tight. We weren't moving forward. We were stuck. That's when Kathleen started making comments. At first, they were subtle, almost casual. We'd be watching TV, and she'd say, "When do you think we'll be able to afford a real vacation? Like somewhere tropical." Or we'd be at a friend's barbecue, and she'd mention, "Did you see that Jessica's husband just bought her a brand new SUV?" I'd reassure her every time. "Things will get better," I'd say. "I just need one big break, one major client, and everything will change." She'd sigh, nod slowly, and say nothing. But I could see it in her eyes, the disappointment, the doubt creeping in. By years 4 and 5, the comments became sharper, more direct. She'd compare me to her friends' husbands who had stable corporate jobs, guys who worked 9 to 5, brought home steady paychecks, and could afford big houses in nice neighborhoods and weekend trips to the mountains. "Why can't you just get a normal job?" she'd ask, her voice edged with frustration. "Why are you so stubborn about this business that's clearly not working?" I tried to explain. I'd tell her I was building something, that success doesn't happen overnight, that I believed in what I was doing. She'd roll her eyes, shake her head, and walk away without another word. That's when the respect started to erode. She'd come home late at night, without any explanation. She'd go out with friends on Friday and Saturday nights, and not tell me where she'd been or who she was with. When I'd ask, trying to keep my tone calm, she'd snap back, "Why do you care? It's not like you can afford to take me anywhere nice anyway." Each comment was like a small cut, and over time, they added up. But I absorbed it. I told myself she was just frustrated, that the financial stress was getting to her, that once the business turned around, things would get better between us. So I kept working, late nights, weekends, chasing leads, pitching clients. I kept pushing, kept hoping that the breakthrough was just around the corner. 2 years before Kathleen filed for divorce, my father died suddenly of a heart attack. I was devastated. He was the only parent I had left, and despite his quiet, reserved nature, he'd always been my anchor. The funeral was small, just a handful of relatives and old co-workers. Kathleen attended, but seemed impatient, checking her phone during the service. A week after the funeral, I met with my father's attorney for the reading of the will. I expected maybe $50,000, perhaps $100,000 if he'd been particularly frugal. What I heard instead left me speechless. My father had accumulated between $8 and $12 million in assets. He owned rental properties in 3 different states that he'd quietly purchased over the decades. He had stock portfolios that he'd been building since the 1980s. He'd made investments in small companies that had paid off big. The attorney explained that my father had lived his entire life, never touching the wealth he'd accumulated, continually reinvesting and growing it. He'd planned to leave it all to me. But there was a complication. The estate was complex. Some of the properties were tied up in probate disputes with distant cousins I'd never met who were contesting the will. Some of his business interests needed to be carefully unwound. The attorney told me it would take at least 2 to 3 years to settle everything and fully release the funds to me. I sat in that attorney's office, stunned. My quiet, coupon-clipping father had been a millionaire, and I'd never known. The attorney handed me documents outlining the estate structure. My father had been wise about protecting his money. Most of the inheritance wasn't just left to me directly. He'd set up an irrevocable trust years before his death, with me as the primary beneficiary. My father had never said a word about any of this, but he'd protected me even after his death. I drove home that day with a decision already forming in my mind. I wasn't going to tell Kathleen. By that point, our marriage was already falling apart. She'd been openly disrespectful for over a year, going out constantly, coming home late, and treating me like I was a burden. I didn't trust her anymore. If I told her about the inheritance, one of 2 things would happen. Either she'd suddenly become sweet and affectionate, staying with me only for the money, or she'd mock me for finally getting lucky and relying on my dead father instead of my own hard work. Neither option appealed to me, so I kept it to myself. I saw the inheritance as my backup plan if my business never worked out. Still, I also saw it as mine, earned by my father's decades of discipline and sacrifice, not something Kathleen had any right to simply because she'd married me. The 2 years after my father's death were brutal. Kathleen's disrespect went from bad to unbearable. She started insulting me in front of our friends at dinner parties and gatherings. I remember one night at a barbecue when someone asked how my business was going. Before I could answer, Kathleen jumped in with a fake laugh. "Oh, Nate's still playing businessman. Maybe one day he'll grow up and get a real job like everyone else." The table went quiet. I just nodded and changed the subject, but I felt the humiliation burn through me. Then she started staying out overnight. The first time it happened, she texted me at 11 p.m. saying she was too tired to drive home and was crashing at her friend's place. No call, no real explanation. When she came home the next morning, I asked her about it. She snapped at me. "What are you, my father? I don't need to report to you." After that, it became a regular thing. Once a week, sometimes twice. She'd go out Friday night and not come back until Saturday afternoon. I'd ask where she'd been, and she'd either ignore me completely or say something cutting like, "Why do you care? You're too busy with your failing business to notice me anyway." The way she looked at me changed, too. It wasn't just anger or frustration anymore. It was disgust. Being in the same room with me made her physically uncomfortable. She'd walk past me without making eye contact. If I tried to start a conversation, she'd sigh loudly and walk away. We stopped eating dinner together. We stopped talking about our days. We became strangers living in the same apartment, except that strangers are usually polite to each other. Kathleen wasn't even giving me that. I didn't fight back. I didn't yell, argue, or demand respect. I just took it day after day. Part of me still held on to this thin hope that my business would land a significant contract, that I'd suddenly start making real money, and everything between us would magically fix itself. I told myself that once she saw me succeed, she'd remember why she married me in the first place. But there was another part of me, a quieter part that was growing louder, that had stopped hoping for anything. That part of me was just watching, observing, taking mental notes of every insult, every late night, every look of contempt. I knew about the inheritance sitting in probate, slowly making its way through the legal system. And I was curious, in a dark, painful way, about what Kathleen would do if she thought I'd never amount to anything. My routine became mechanical. I'd wake up, work on my business, meet with my father's attorneys every few weeks to check on the estate's progress, then come home to an empty apartment or a wife who treated me like I was invisible. The attorneys kept telling me the same thing. It would take time. I nodded and waited. Kathleen never once asked about my father's estate. Not a single question. Not did he leave you anything, or are there any legal issues to deal with? Nothing. And honestly, why would she ask? She'd been to my father's house dozens of times over the years. She'd seen his old furniture, his coupon drawer, his ancient car in the driveway. She'd probably done the math in her head and figured there might be $20,000 or $30,000 at most, barely enough to cover the funeral expenses and maybe pay off his mortgage. I never brought it up. I never said, actually, there's more than you think. I just let her believe what she wanted to believe. Month by month, I watched Kathleen pull further away. She stopped wearing her wedding ring. I noticed it was missing one day and didn't say anything. She didn't explain. Our conversations, when they happened at all, were purely functional. Did you pay the electric bill? Can you pick up milk? That was it. No warmth. No connection. Nothing. And somewhere in the middle of all that coldness, I had a realization that hit me hard. I didn't want to fix this anymore. I didn't want to save our marriage. What I wanted was to see what she'd do. Would she actually leave me? Would she walk away when she thought I was at my lowest, when she believed I had nothing to offer her? I wasn't testing her, exactly. It was more like I was giving her enough rope to show me who she really was. And deep down, I already knew the answer. I just needed to see it happen. I needed the confirmation. So I stayed quiet, kept working, kept waiting. And sure enough, that's precisely what she did. She walked away. It was a Tuesday afternoon, around 2 p.m., when Kathleen decided to serve me with divorce papers. Most people hire a process server, a neutral third party who delivers legal documents professionally and quietly. But Kathleen didn't want that. She wanted to see my face when I got them. She walked into my small office herself, holding a manila envelope in her hand, and I could see the satisfaction in her eyes before she even said a word. She walked straight to my desk. "Here," she said, and tossed the envelope onto my desk like she was throwing away trash. It landed on top of the client proposal I'd been working on. "I'm filing for divorce. I'm done wasting my life on a man who can't provide." She paused, looking me dead in the eye, then added with a smirk, "Good luck with your little business, Nate. Maybe you'll finally figure out what the rest of us already know. You're never going to make it." She stood a bit, waiting for me to react, waiting for me to beg, to argue, to get angry, something. I could feel her eyes on me, watching for any sign of emotion. I didn't give her one. I reached for the envelope, opened it slowly, and pulled out the papers. I flipped through the first few pages. Petition for dissolution of marriage, division of assets, spousal support request. I read just enough to understand what I was looking at. Then I set the papers down on my desk and looked back up at her. "I'll need my lawyer to review these before I sign anything," I said. She rolled her eyes, the way she'd been doing for the past 2 years, whenever I said anything she didn't like. Of course you do, she shot back. Always stalling and always making excuses. Just sign them, Nate. Let's get this over with, so we can both move on. I didn't respond. The silence stretched out between us. She waited for me to say something, anything, but I gave her nothing. After about 10 seconds, she huffed in frustration, shook her head like I was hopeless, and turned on her heel. She walked out of my office without another word, leaving the door wide open behind her. I sat there for a long time after she left. The office was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioner and the distant sound of traffic outside. Part of me felt relief, like a weight I'd been carrying for years had finally been lifted. She'd done it. She'd actually walked away, thinking she was escaping a sinking ship before it went under completely. She had no idea what was coming. I picked up my phone and called my lawyer, a woman who'd been handling my father's estate since his death. She answered on the second ring. I told her the situation. She asked, "Does Kathleen know about the inheritance?" "No," I said. "She has no idea." She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "Good. Let's keep it that way for now. Don't say a word to her or anyone else. But you need to understand something. You'll have to disclose it during discovery. That's the phase where both sides have to reveal all their financial information to the court. It's the law. When that happens, things are going to get very interesting." I ended the call not knowing how to feel about everything. The divorce process moved forward. Kathleen was confident, almost gleeful. She'd told mutual friends that she was finally free, that she'd wasted enough years on me, that she was ready to find someone successful. Her attorney was aggressive, demanding spousal support, claiming that she'd supported me through years of business struggles and deserved compensation. I said nothing publicly. I let my lawyer handle everything. Then came the discovery phase, where both parties are legally required to disclose all assets, debts, and financial information. My lawyer submitted my financial disclosure documents to Kathleen's attorney. Among the standard information, my struggling business, our modest savings account, our basic assets, was one additional item. A pending inheritance from my late father's estate, currently in probate, estimated value between $8 and $12 million. I wasn't there when Kathleen's attorney called her with the news, but my lawyer told me later that Kathleen's attorney had called her within an hour, voice tight with barely controlled shock, asking for clarification. My lawyer calmly explained the situation, my father's estate, the complex probate process, the timeline for distribution, and most importantly, the trust structure that protected the assets. Kathleen called me directly that evening. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail, her voice shaking, no longer mocking, but stunned and confused. "Nate, I just heard about your father's estate. Why didn't you tell me? We need to talk. Call me back." I deleted the voicemail. I had nothing to say to her. Kathleen's attorney immediately shifted strategy. They filed motions arguing that the inheritance, even though it came from my father, should be considered in the divorce settlement. They claimed that because my father died during our marriage, the inheritance was a marital asset. They argued that I should be required to pay substantial spousal support based on my impending wealth. They tried every angle they could think of. My lawyer was ready for all of it. She submitted the trust documents, the estate structure, and the legal precedents that protected me. Here's what my father had done, and why it was legally bulletproof. First, the bulk of the inheritance wasn't left directly to me. My father had established an irrevocable trust years before his death, with me as the primary beneficiary. The trust was explicitly designed to protect assets from creditors, lawsuits, and divorce settlements. The trust document expressly stated that the assets were for my sole benefit and could not be considered marital property under any circumstances. Second, the trust included a spendthrift provision, which legally prevents anyone, including an ex-spouse, from accessing the trust assets. I could receive distributions from the trust, but Kathleen had no claim to the trust principal or its income. Third, even the portions of the inheritance not in the trust were classified as separate property under our state's law. Inheritances received by one spouse, even during marriage, are generally considered separate property, as long as they aren't commingled with marital assets. I hadn't received any money yet since everything was still in probate, and I certainly hadn't mixed any anticipated inheritance with our joint accounts or used it to pay marital debts. Fourth, the timing worked in my favor. My father had died during our marriage, yes, but the funds were still locked in probate and hadn't been distributed. Courts typically cannot divide or consider assets that haven't actually been received, primarily when they're structured in a protective trust. Fifth, Kathleen's attorneys argued that her support during our marriage entitled her to a share. My lawyer destroyed that argument easily. She presented evidence of Kathleen's behavior over the past 2 years, her absences, her disrespect, her detachment from the marriage. More importantly, the inheritance was entirely due to my relationship with my father and his decades of careful financial planning, not any contribution or effort from Kathleen. Finally, regarding spousal support, my lawyer pointed out that the trust distributions were discretionary. The trustee, a professional fiduciary, not me, had complete discretion over when and how much to distribute. I couldn't be forced to take distributions, and the court couldn't compel the trustee to distribute funds for the purpose of paying spousal support. You're right, I apologize. Let me rewrite only the section you provided, focusing on adding details for depth and removing fluffy, ambiguous, redundant, and repetitive words to make it clear for a 16-year-old. After a year and 6 months of legal battles, the judge was ready to deliver her decision. I sat on my side of the courtroom, completely calm. Across the aisle, Kathleen gripped the armrest, her jaw tight. She looked terrified. The judge didn't waste time. She addressed the inheritance first. Because my father had placed the money in an irrevocable trust with spendthrift provisions, it belonged to me alone. Translation: the trust was a legal vault that protected the cash from being split in a divorce. Kathleen couldn't touch it. Period. The judge continued. Even if Kathleen's lawyers argued I had access to millions, I technically didn't. A trustee, a neutral third party, controlled when and how much money I received. The court couldn't force distributions to pay Kathleen. That avenue was closed. Next, the judge explained what Kathleen would receive. She got half of our marital assets, $6,000 from our $12,000 savings account, some household items, and half of my business, which was valued at zero because it generated no profit. Then came spousal support. The judge noted 3 facts. Our marriage lasted under 8 years. Kathleen could work and support herself, and my current business income was barely enough to pay my own bills. The judge awarded Kathleen $1,800 per month for exactly 2 years, temporary support to help her transition. From an $8 to $12 million inheritance, Kathleen would receive zero. The gavel cracked down. This court is adjourned. I stood up, feeling a weight lift from my chest. Across the aisle, Kathleen sat frozen, staring at nothing. Reality was sinking in. She'd walked away for millions. I left the courtroom and never looked back. 3 days later, my phone rang. Kathleen's name appeared on the screen. I ignored it. She called again an hour later. Ignored. Then again that evening. I never answered. The text started next. Long paragraphs flooded my phone. Nate, please, we need to talk. I know you're angry, but just hear me out. This isn't fair. We were married for 8 years. I didn't open a single one. When calls and texts failed, she appeared at my office. Twice. My assistant turned her away both times. The second visit required building security to escort her out. Then came the emails. Subject lines like "Please read this" and "We need to talk about us" filled my inbox. I created a filter that sent everything from her address straight to the trash. When direct contact failed, Kathleen switched tactics. She started reaching out to mutual friends. One friend, someone I'd known for years, called me and said Kathleen had reached out to him in tears, asking him to talk to me on her behalf. He told me what she'd said, that she was sorry, that she'd been stressed and hadn't meant the things she'd said, that 8 years of marriage had to mean something. Another friend told me Kathleen had said that my father would have wanted me to take care of her, that he'd known her and would have expected me to do the right thing. That one particularly infuriated me. My father had watched Kathleen's treatment of me in the last years of his life. He'd seen her disrespect, her contempt. If anything, the way he'd structured the trust suggested he'd anticipated exactly this situation and had protected me from it. I didn't respond to any messages that came through friends. Then Kathleen tried a different approach. She started posting on social media vague messages about how hard, unfair life was, how she'd given years to someone who'd abandoned her when he finally got lucky, how people show their true colors when money is involved. She was trying to paint me as the villain, the heartless ex-husband who'd left her with nothing. A few mutual acquaintances reached out, asking for my side of the story. I told them nothing. I didn't engage. I didn't defend myself publicly. I simply let her words hang in the air, empty and transparent. Finally, about 3 months after the divorce was finalized, Kathleen managed to get a message to me through someone I couldn't avoid, my business partner, who'd known both of us for years. He pulled me aside one day and said, "Look, Nate, I know it's not my place, but Kathleen reached out to me. She's really struggling. She says she can't afford her rent, that she's barely getting by on the support payments. She's asking if you'd consider helping her out just a little, given everything you're about to receive." I told her I'd pass the message along, but man, I don't know what happened between you two. That's your call. I looked at my partner for a long moment, then I told him the truth. I told him about the years of disrespect, the insults, the nights she didn't come home, the way she'd mocked me when she served the divorce papers. I told him how she'd walked away thinking I had nothing, how she'd shown me exactly who she was when she thought there was no money involved. My partner listened, then nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said. "I'm not passing along any more messages." But I decided to send one final message myself, through my attorney, so there would be a clear record. My lawyer drafted a brief letter and had it delivered to Kathleen's attorney, who would forward it to her. The letter was simple and direct. "Kathleen, you made your feelings about our marriage clear over the past several years, and especially clear when you filed for divorce. You walked away from our marriage believing I had nothing to offer you, and you did so with contempt and mockery. I am simply respecting the decision you made. The court has determined what you are entitled to, and you will receive exactly that. Nothing more, nothing less. Do not contact me again, directly or through intermediaries. Our marriage is over, and so is any obligation I might have felt toward you. You had 8 years to believe in us. You chose not to. Live with that choice." After that letter was sent, I blocked Kathleen's number. I blocked her on every social media platform. I instructed my assistant to refuse any calls or visits from her. I changed my routine, started going to a different gym, a different coffee shop, anywhere I thought I might accidentally run into her. I wanted no contact, no possibility of her manipulation reaching me. The probate process will be complete in a few months, and I should have full access to the trust. My business, ironically, has started to turn around. I don't know if it's because I'm no longer carrying the weight of a toxic marriage, or if it's just timing, but things are looking up. I've started thinking about what I'll do with the inheritance. Part of me wants to expand my business, hire a real team, and finally build what I'd envisioned all those years ago. Another part of me wants to invest it wisely, the way my father did, live modestly, and let it grow. Maybe I'll do both. What I won't do is waste a single dollar on someone who didn't believe in me when it mattered. I heard from a mutual friend that Kathleen is now working full-time, living in a small apartment, and struggling to make ends meet. Part of me feels nothing about that. Another part of me feels a grim satisfaction. She made a calculated decision to leave me when she thought I was a failure. She mocked me, disrespected me, and walked away. The fact that her calculation was wrong and that she walked away from millions of dollars is not my problem. It's the consequence of her own choices, her own character. Some people have asked me whether I feel guilty and whether I think I should help her despite everything. The answer is no. Guilt would imply I did something wrong. I didn't. I worked hard, I endured disrespect with dignity, and I protected what my father built for me. Kathleen had every opportunity to be a partner, to believe in us, to weather the hard times together. She chose mockery and abandonment instead. I'm simply letting her live with that choice. Some people might say I should have told her about the money, that I was deceptive by keeping it secret. But I don't see it that way. I had no obligation to share that information with someone who was actively disrespecting and detaching from me. She revealed who she truly was when she thought there was nothing to gain. And now she has to live with the consequences of that revelation. Thanks for listening to my story. I hope it reminds you that patience, dignity, and protecting what matters can sometimes lead to justice, even when it takes years to arrive.